Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome back to Business Unusual. This is a live show where we talk about the changing nature of work. I'm Susie Jackson. I'm a news editor at LinkedIn, coming to you live from my home in New York City. On the show today, we're going to talk about career changes. It is a really challenging time for so many people and for jobs generally. This week, the National Bureau of Economic Research formally declared that the US fell into a recession in February. Oil producer BP announced 14% cut in jobs globally. The Labor Department said Americans had filed more than 1.5 million new unemployment claims. That's the lowest number since COVID really started taking hold in the US, but it's still an extraordinarily high number. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has warned that millions of workers may not have jobs to go back to. He's calling this, quote, the biggest economic shock in living memory. Really challenging times. We're seeing professionals in some industries that are very hard hit start to rethink career pivots. LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Index, you see this graphic we have on the screen now, it looks at workers' feelings on job security, finances, and on their career outlook. This month, it found that workers in industries that are experiencing low confidence, like that have been really hard hit, retail, entertainment, for example, those workers were more likely to turn to online learning in hopes of making career changes. On the show today, I want you to talk to me. I want to know, are you searching for a job? Are you looking to hire? Talk to me, talk to each other in the comments. Maybe we can make some of those connections here on the show. We're going to be getting to as many of your questions and comments as we can today. On yesterday's show, my co-host Caroline Fairchild had a great conversation with Karen Lynch. She is an SVP at Cvs Health and the president of Aetna. CVS throughout the COVID crisis has still been hiring. And she came to the show to talk a little bit about some of the creative ways that they've been doing that, including partnering with other industries who have been furloughing and laying off workers. So let's hear Karen talk to us a little bit about that.
I think that this was something that was really unique, and we were very excited that we were able to do this. We worked with some of the companies that were furloughing, like a Marriott and a Hilton, and we had a very strong partnership with them. When they were furloughing their employees, they were sending them to us so that we could hire them, so that we had that joint partnership, and it worked really well. And we know that when the Marriott or the Hilton wants to bring back their employees, that they'll go back from the CVS stores if they want, and then obviously we'll be hiring to replace those individuals.
Karen Lynch there talking to us from CVS Health and from Aetna, talking about CVS's creative approach to hiring in this time. I think it's a really interesting way of responding to this crisis in new ways. I also think it's a really interesting thing to consider from the employee point of view. There's folks who were working in the hospitality industry who are now perhaps pivoting to roles in CVS and health. Maybe some of those pivots hold after this time passes. To think more about career changes, career pivots, I wanted to bring out my guest, Whitney Johnson. Whitney is the CEO of WLJ Advisors. Whitney, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Susie.
Whitney, it's a time of great disruption. We're going to show a post you did on LinkedIn recently here, talking about disrupting yourself. Your work centers around the idea of disruption and disrupting yourself, but perhaps in a different way than many of us may be used to thinking about. Can you define for us disruption as you use it?
Yes. So disruption as I use it, it's based on the work of Clayton Christensen, who is one of my mentors. And he wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, talking about this idea at its simplest, which is a silly little thing can take over the world, like the automobile did to the horse and buggy, like the telephone did to the telegraph. More recently, we've seen Netflix disrupt Blockbuster, and Uber and Lyft are disrupting cabs. Well, the big insider aha that I had as I was working and investing alongside Clayton was that this theory of disruption just wasn't about products and services and companies and countries. It was also about people, that people can disrupt themselves. You start at the bottom of a ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump to the bottom of a new ladder. So I'm using personal disruption that way. And what's unique about personal disruption is that you're not only Netflix, you're also Blockbuster, and you're not only Uber and Lyft, you're also the cabs, because you are disrupting you. And so there's this cycle where you learn, leap, and repeat when you disrupt yourself.
I want to say hello to some of the people joining Whitney and I on the stream today. We have Alan from New Jersey. Welcome. David from Sacramento. Quentin from Virginia, Ruth from Vancouver, Sean from St. Louis. Thank you for joining us on Business Unusual today. We're talking with Whitney Johnson about career pivots and disrupting yourself. Whitney, I just heard you talk about a ladder. being at the bottom, moving through the middle to the top. I know you also talk about that in terms of an S curve. Can you just talk to us about that path, about that journey that we're on, and how it's like kind of segmented out and how we should think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's interesting is I mentioned this idea of you start at the bottom, you climb to the top, and then you jump. Well, that was sort of the first big insight we had, was that people can disrupt themselves. But the next big aha that I had is, as we were investing, I realized that this S curve that we were using to help us gauge how quickly an innovation would be adopted, we've also used it to figure out how quickly a virus will spread, could help us also understand how people learn, how we grow, and how we develop. And so whenever you start something new, and I'm going to trace this for you, you start something new, you're at the bottom of that S. And initially growth is happening, but it feels and looks like it's very slow. And so you know that you're at the bottom of the S, growth is going to feel slow. That helps you avoid discouragement. But then you put in the work, the effort, and you accelerate into the steep, sleek back of that curve, this place where you feel confident and competent. And this is really the exhilarating part of that curve, where there's this sweet spot feeling. And then you get to the high end of the curve where you've figured things out. You know exactly what you were doing at one point. You're like, this was the right job at one point, but now I'm starting to get a little bit bored. I'm starting to dial it in. And so you're now experiencing a dilemma. Do you jump, which feels kind of scary, but if you don't jump, you could get pushed. And so you have that dilemma, what we call the innovator's dilemma. And so you learn, and then you leap and you repeat. And that S curve, if you think about it and you look at your career, you look at your life, you'll find that you have repeatedly started at the bottom, climbed to the top, and jumped, whether it was high school, college, first job, second job, etc.
So while this is certainly a challenging and uncertain time, I think the message you're saying is take some comfort in looking back and knowing that you've already faced a lot of other times of transition in your life. And this one certainly is unprecedented, but there's a path forward, there's a pattern. And some people in the stream are joining us. They're saying that they're also looking for career changes to make these pivots. I want to say hi to Austin, who says, I'm stuck between so many choices: school, career change, move laterally at my company. Miriam says, also looking for a career change in marketing, but want to go into higher education. Big move. Lakshmi from New York, looking for a career pivot. And Ao says, I'm looking for a job in education or healthcare as a data analyst. I'm changing my career from teaching to be a data analyst. So kind of a swap there. A marketer wants to become a teacher wants to become a data analyst. A lot of people primed for this conversation, thinking about transitions. We're talking about this ladder, this curve. I know you think that this is a moment where we've all been forced to the top. Tell us more about the opportunity in that, even if it feels really scary.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize in any way. I mean, this disruption sometimes feels like chaos. It's upheaval, and it is hard for basically everyone on the globe for different reasons, but it's been a real challenge for people. So I don't want to minimize that. But I also know, and I think if we look at history, these periods of disruption present a massive opportunity for us to really reset in a way that we had not had an opportunity to do beforehand. And so I think in this particular instance, you get to that top of that S curve and you may think it's time for me to do something new, but for whatever reason, we weren't willing to jump. Now we don't have to make that choice. The choice has been made for us. And so the question that we all want to ask ourselves is, now that we've been disrupted, we're at the bottom of that new S curve and figuring out, okay, what am I going to do? Are we going to take advantage of that? And I think this is really the main thing that I want to emphasize here, is the best way for us to manage through disruption, the best way for us to thrive through disruption, and that's what we're really looking for, is for us to disrupt ourselves.
So if we're ready to make that scary leap, to jump off the top of the curve, the top of the ladder, to start the new thing, what are some practical things we can start to do to be introspective and think about what is the next right ladder or curve to start trying to ascend?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, we have this framework, this 7-point framework of personal disruption that will allow you to, because as you were listening, you're probably all like, oh, you know what? I do disrupt myself every couple of years. Like we said, high school, college, etc. So you already intuitively know how to disrupt yourself. And what we've done is we've developed a 7-point framework that will allow you to more systematically and effectively disrupt yourself. Well, one of the points of that framework is this notion of really doubling down on your strengths. And you're probably listening to me saying, well, duh, duh, like, yes, I should use my strengths. But the thing that's so interesting is that we don't often use our strengths. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is think about, okay, so what are my strengths? And the reason that we don't recognize them is because they're things that you do so reflexively well, you don't actually value them. And so let me tell you a quick story, and then I'll give you a couple of clues for how to think about what your strengths are. So if any of you follow football, and many of you probably do, you have noticed that over the past decade, the technology that the coaches use to talk to each other via the headsets has advanced significantly. And those advances took place because of a man named John Cave. He's the VP of technology at the NFL. Well, that may not have happened unless or without Michelle McKenna, who was his boss. She's the chief information officer. She joins the organization about 8 years ago. And she looks around at all the different people on her team and says, well, what are their real strengths? And she looked at John Cave and she said, John's in charge of enterprise systems throughout the organization, and he's doing a good job. But what he's really good at is building things. So she goes to John and she says, I want you to advance the game of football through technology. And you would have thought, as you're listening to this, he's like, yes, put me in, coach. And instead he's like, no, he resisted it. He didn't want to do it because what it meant is that moving to play to his strengths, he was going to have to give up a few things in order to do that. And he didn't quite recognize how valuable this strength was that he had. And she said, trust me, you're going to be a great innovator. And he is. And so one of the things that I want you to all think about is, first of all, what are your strengths? And those strengths are things that you do reflexively well. And then once you figure out what they are, then you want to lean into them. So do you want me to give you a few clues, Susie, on how to know what they are?
I do, because I want to think about my own strengths.
Okay. All right. So one of the clues is I want you to think about what exasperates you. So Alana Cates said that the frustration of genius is believing that if it's easy for you, it must be easy for everyone else. So how do you know what exasperates you? Here are some markers for you. When you find yourself saying, this is just common sense. Everybody knows how to do it. Well, everybody doesn't know how to do it. You know how to do it, but everybody else doesn't. And so, yes, you need to be patient and you need to bring other people along that S-curve. But when you hear that thing, that statement coming out of your mouth, I want you to get really curious and go, okay, so what is the strength here that I have? And ask yourself, am I using this? And am I applying this? And am I talking about this as I'm looking to pivot to what I want to do next?
I love the idea of taking a moment of frustration and putting a positive spin on it, not just kind of berating yourself for being a Debbie Downer, but saying, actually, wait, there's something more I can learn here. Go on.
Yeah. And so another thing that I want you to do, and this one's actually really hard to do, is to think about compliments that you get, and then compliments in particular that you dismiss. Now, you're probably thinking, because I know you're thinking yourself, I can't even remember the last compliment I got, because you just dismiss it immediately. We deflect it immediately. And yet, every time you get a compliment, people are saying to you, this is your genius. And so you want to write it down. And it can be any kind of compliment. It can be, you have nice eyes. And like, if you have nice eyes, then what does that mean? It means you probably want to make sales calls in person, or at least over Zoom, rather than over the phone. Or if it's, you're a kind person, you're a patient person, that means that people like having you on the team. Whatever that skill is. And I think right now, especially, we need soft skills. I know LinkedIn has done some surveys saying, we've got the technical skills covered, we need the soft skills. And so what are those? The patient and kind, et cetera. So take those compliments and write them down, and then think about, am I using those? Am I talking about them? Am I articulating them as I'm looking to make this move that I want to make?
Why do you think it's so hard for us to take those compliments, even just to take them in the first place, and then to remember to write them down and understand that that's actually someone telling you you have an opportunity to double down on something?
I think part of it is that we want those compliments so much, but we are socialized from a very young age to be modest, to not be boastful, to not brag. And there's something about, I can think of even yesterday, you and I were having a call to have a conversation about what we were going to talk about today. And you gave me this lovely compliment, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. I had to just stop. I had to say thank you. And so there's something in us that we've been taught, we've been socialized to not receive those compliments because we might be bad if we sort of take pleasure or are grateful that someone just said, you're really good at that. And so I think that's one of the things is sort of this discomfort. This is a form of disrupting yourself, is when you get that compliment, to write it down, to take it in, to graciously say thank you. And by the way, to remember that when someone gives you a compliment, they are effectively handing you a gift. And when you don't say thank you and when you deflect it, you're kind of throwing that gift back in their face. It's a rude thing to do. If that helps you at all, then please do it. But I think that's one of the reasons I think we struggle with it.
We have a lot of excellent comments from the stream. People who are trying to see this as an opportunity as well. Brigham says, yes, what an opportunity to take advantage of the shift in mindset, approaches to work, etc., to make positive changes in the workforce and in our own lives. Brigham, I'm glad that you've got a positive spin on it. We are hearing Kristen saying that she's been an executive assistant for most of her life, and anywhere she goes, she has to learn the new ways of a company. So why not shift to a totally different industry? After a big layoff, maybe it's time to just learn something new in a different realm altogether.
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
I completely agree. I mean, I think I have this hypothesis is that, I know I've been fired, I've, been laid off in my life. And I have this hypothesis is that when we lose a job and basically I think that oftentimes we know that we're on that wrong S curve. We're either at the top of the S curve, it's time for us to do something new. We're at the bottom and it's just not working. And we know that it's time for us to jump. We know that it's time for us to do something new. And we just don't quite have the courage to make that jump. And so the universe sometimes just gives us a little bit of a nudge. And I think that's what we have right now, is that nudge to go do that thing that we've been thinking we really want to try.
And we have some members in the stream who are very open about wanting to do just that. Andre says, I'm a nurse practitioner with a medical background, but I'm an artist at heart. I would love to pursue a career in the arts, design, or culinary. Am I crazy? Whitney, I know you're an artist at heart too. What do you say to Andre?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this goes to, one of the points that we talk about is this idea of battling entitlement. What do I mean when I say battle entitlement? There's lots of different ways to think about it. And so when you're looking at making a career shift, one of the challenges that I think we have is that we're saying, I want to jump to a new S curve. And you do, and of course you do. Now, in order to make that jump, for example, you want to move from being a nurse practitioner to do something in the arts. You have someone who you want to hire you effectively, that you then need to also jump to a new S curve. And they're looking at it and saying, but you don't know art. Like, you get paid to be a nurse, not an artist. And so they're saying, well, if I jump to that new S curve, that is really scary for me. I'm not sure I want to do it. So part of it, the onus on us is to say, and this is why we have to battle our sense of entitlement, is to not just say, well, I want to do something new, the world should let me. It's to say, all right, I want to do something new. How do I pack a parachute for this person that I need to jump to a new S curve? Basically, they're jumping to that S curve by hiring me. They're taking a risk. What do I need to do in order so that it doesn't feel scary for them to hire me? What do I need to do? How do I need to talk about what I know how to do? How do I need to say, okay, yes, I know I'm a nurse practitioner, but here's what I know about art. And here's how everything that I've learned applies to art. So how do you translate? If you speak Chinese and you're in a room where everybody speaks English, you're going to figure out a way to translate this. This is exactly the same thing. How do you translate what you know how to do around nursing and the medical profession into the artistic profession? And is there an intermediate step that you can take to get yourself there? So we translate, we're humble enough to say, they're the ones that need to jump. I've got to pack that parachute for them to jump. How do I make it so it's safe for them to hire me?
I want to echo a few more members in the stream saying that they're ready to make that jump. Breton says he'd love to move from hospitality and tourism to urban planning and regional development, still in real estate, but with a much larger purpose. Cody says, feel fortunate to be in the financial sector, but starting to feel burned out. would love to work from home in communications, which is what Cody got his degree in. And Anna says looking into switching from doing events to wine sales. Another question in the stream here to piggyback off, we've got some members who are saying I'm ready to do it. Where is it? Let's see. Shireen says, how would you identify employers who are open to employees who have disrupted themselves and have to pivot? How do you continue on making that a little bit less of a scary conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's no easy answer to that. You know, how do you identify employers that are open to it? I think the only way you can actually do that is to just start looking for people in your network or networking into people who may work at companies, and just start, well, that didn't make sense. Here's what I want you to do is you just start asking questions and you start searching and you look for stories of people who were doing one thing and they wanted to do something entirely different. Now, what I will say to you is that this is not something that we've got to pack that parachute. Let me give you a quick story that I think will help illustrate this. Is sometimes you may want to make a jump from here to here, but it's a really big leap. Not a big leap for you necessarily, but it's a big leap for the professional employer. And so you do this in stages or steps. A quick example of this is a woman by the name of Karen Clark. So she she worked at a company called Novell in the tech industry. She was moving up. She was in marketing. And she had this dream, you know, someday I want to be a CEO, right? But it wasn't obvious, right? I'm in marketing and I want to be a CEO. Well, as the company grows, she decides, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a job. I'm going to disrupt myself. I'm going to go take a job at another firm where I can become a CMO at the smaller firm. That smaller firm, so you're disrupting yourself, you're taking a step back. This is one of the steps of personal disruption. You take a step back to slingshot forward. So what does she do? She goes to a much smaller firm with a much smaller paycheck, but it gives her an opportunity to go from being a marketing person to the chief marketing officer. Then the company gets acquired by Symantec. She's able to move up over time to become the chief marketing officer for Symantec, a very big company, billions of dollars. She wants to be a CEO. Well, she can't immediately go to being the CEO of $1 billion company or several $billion. She has to take another step back in order to slingshot forward. And she goes and becomes the CEO of a $10 million company. And then over time, they get acquired and she becomes the CEO of a $200 million company. So my condensed response to that is, as you're thinking about what you want to do, is how can you take a step back to slingshot forward? So you've got to pack that parachute for people. But what are some of the intermediate steps that you can take to get to where you want to go? And what kind of steps back are you willing to take in order to slingshot forward to where you want to go?
Yeah, it can be frightening to take some of those steps back. It sounds like she had a really thoughtful approach to it and had the presence of mind to do it. Not everyone probably has that luxury right now. It can be scary. But we do have some members in the stream who said they have pivoted. So I want to give them a congrats and a shout out real quick.
Yes.
Nathan. Yeah, Nathan says, I was a fairly successful corporate event photographer and videographer, but it had to pivot into something like real estate marketing to make ends meet. So maybe not the luxury of choice there, but you did it, Nathan. Bob said, moved from insurance sales to doing something more fulfilling. I love personal development and fitness. So Bob, great time to be exploring that. People are stuck at home. They want to do Zoom workouts. And Zoe says, I did it last year. I left a 20-year career in finance, and I'm now driving employee engagement using diversity and inclusion and process improvement strategies using my leadership examples and success in those roles. So congrats to you.
Yeah, well done, everybody.
Doing it. For other people who are about to do it, maybe starting to do it, what is it like in the beginning? We talked earlier in the show about sometimes at the beginning, you make that big jump, you've done it, there's a great feeling of accomplishment there, but is it smooth sailing right away?
I love that loaded question, Susie. Of course, it's not smooth sailing. I mean, you're at the bottom, the launch point of that S curve, and it's going to feel quite scary for you. And you're going to be moving along potentially, but it's just going to some days feel discouraging. One of the things though that you can think about as you're at that bottom and you're trying to figure out, I just made this jump. Is this the right curve? Is this the wrong curve? There are a couple of questions that you can ask yourself. One, first of all, is, am I finding a way to play where no one else is playing? Meaning I took this new job or I'm trying this new business venture. Am I carving out a space for myself where I am able to build something, where I'm able to create something? The second question you want to ask yourself that goes back to your strengths is, are you leveraging what you do exceptionally well, and really owning what you do exceptionally well and valuing what you do exceptionally well? If those two pieces are in place, you're off to a good start. The third question you want to ask yourself is, are you enjoying the work? So you can be at that bottom of the S curve, sort of getting ready to climb this mountain, and it is hard, but you're exhilarated. Well, that is a good sign that you've made a good leap. If you're finding yourself just really dreading the work, it may be a symptom of a flatlining curve. And then the fourth question you want to ask yourself is, as you look at this, are you starting to gain momentum as you move along this S curve? And if you're doing it for a while and there's just no momentum, it may be that you need to tweak things a little bit. It may be the wrong S curve, but the thing that I have learned, and you know this as well as you look back on your career, is that no S curve is ever wasted. There's always something you learn in an experience that's you're going to be able to carry that with you and help you be successful along the next S curve.
Thank you, Whitney. And we have a couple of questions that are related to that look back idea around age. Eddie asked, do you ever pivot your career when you feel like, how do you pivot your career when you feel like you're at a decline point, giving 50 years old as an example? And Travers says, is there an age level that works better for this type of move?
Such a great question. So I'm going to start answering that question by talking about constraints. And so this is another point of the framework, is whenever we're thinking about wanting to do something new, we think if I had more time or more money or I were younger, et cetera, then I could really climb this S curve. And one of the things that we found, just quick story, there was this post-mortem done of 200 failed startups, and they divided them into funded startups, the ones that had plenty of resources on hand, plenty of cash, and then the unfunded startups, the ones that had to bootstrap. And what they found is that the number one reason that the funded startups went out of business was that they ran out of cash. And it was only the number 10 reason for the unfunded startups. The other thing that I would say to you is just very quick story. Susan Peterson on Entrepreneur, she starts out and she wants to start a business. She needs $200 for that business. She doesn't have 200 US dollars. So she goes out and she says, all right, well, I'm going to go get windows that have been taken out of buildings. I'm going to get the aluminum. I'm going to pound them into scrap. I'm going to turn that into scrap to get the money, the cash that I need to start my business. Then she takes that $200, she buys a sewing machine, she buys leather, she sews moccasins, sells them on Etsy. This was about 10 years ago. Now it's a $10 million business, all because she was willing to start within that constraint. And the thing that I would say to all of us is that whatever constraint we have, if we will embrace it, it can become a tool of creation. Now, in terms of the age question that you asked specifically, here's what I would do with that and in any situation is you're going to look at it, something that you want to do, and you're going to say to yourself, okay, here are all the reasons why they wouldn't hire me. I might be too old, or let's start with too old. And then you want to say to yourself, but what are the compensating strengths that I have as a consequence of my age? We think a lot about a woman who wants to on-ramp, and we can say women and men who want to on-ramp, and they're like, you're too old. But on the other hand, you're not going to have children. You don't have children you can care for. So that's not going to be a concern. Another thing that you can say is, again, our workforce needs soft skills. When you're 50, presumably you have more soft skills than you did when you were 20. And so part of this is that ability to talk about what you know how to do in a language that people can hear and understand and possibly update. Again, this goes back to the humility. One of the things I found with people who are struggling, I know that there's ageism, but sometimes people do this, well, I've paid my dues, or I want to change, but I don't really want to change. That willingness to say, here's what I need to learn. I'm going to learn this. And then also, here are all those things that I thought were weaknesses, but in fact, they're strengths. And the last thing I would say on that is oftentimes there is strength in a vicinity of weakness, but sometimes there's shame attached to it. And so we struggle with that. So what you've got to do is think about what your narrative is around the conversation that you're having. Okay, I could go on, but I'll stop there for a second, Susie.
Thank you, Whitney. And we do have to wrap up in just a moment here, but I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We've talked a lot about constraint being a catalyst, and there's ample constraint that everyone is facing in their unique ways. I'm so glad that you could come and address all that. We had so many great comments and questions in the stream, so many people either pivoting or wanting to, and I think that you give some really valuable advice, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
And Whitney accepted the compliment. That's great. That's something that she was talking about. If someone compliments you, be able to say, yes, maybe you can figure out that there's some hidden strength in there that you weren't aware of. So thank you to Whitney for that advice. Thank you to you for joining us. We had so many wonderful comments. It's really great to see everyone trying to find a positive side of all this difficulty and uncertainty and try to turn that into the next career move. We wish you the best of luck with that. This is Business Unusual. We are live from the LinkedIn news page 5 days a week at noon Eastern. And I hope you join me back on Monday. I'm going to be talking with branding and marketing expert Martin Lindstrom about consumer behavior, about what we can expect to see as cities and states start to reopen. What's the buying behavior going to be like? What should companies be thinking about? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you on Monday, and have a great weekend.